On board Balloon Skylark. April 1st, 2848. Now, my dear friend, now for your sins you are to suffer the infliction of a long gossiping letter. I tell you distinctly that I am going to punish you for all of your impertinences by being as tedious, as discursive, as incoherent, and as unsatisfactory as possible. Besides, here I am, cooped up in a dirty balloon, with some one or two of the canaille, with some 1 or 200 of the canaille, all bound on a pleasure excursion. What a funny idea some people have of pleasure. And I have no prospect of touching terra firma for a month at least. Nobody to talk to. Nothing to do. When one has nothing to do, then it's the time to correspond with one's friends. You perceive then why it is that I write you this letter. It is on account of my ennui and your sins. Get ready your spectacles and make up your mind to be annoyed. I mean, to write at you every day during this odious voyage. Hi-ho. When will any invention visit the human pericranium? Are we forever to be doomed to the 1,000 inconveniences of the balloon? Will nobody contrive a more expeditious mode of progress? The jog-trot movement, to my thinking, is little less than positive torture. Upon my word, we have not made more than 100 miles the hour since leaving home. The very birds beat us. At least some of them. I assure you that I do not exaggerate at all. Our motion, no doubt, seems slower than it actually is. This on account of our having no objects about which to estimate our velocity, and on account of having no objects, and on account of our going with the wind. To be sure, whenever we meet a balloon, we have a chance of perceiving their rate. And then I admit things do not appear so very bad. Accustomed as I am to this mode of traveling, I cannot get over a kind of giddiness whenever a balloon passes us in a current directly overhead. It always seems to me like an immense bird of prey about to pounce upon us and carry us off in its claws. One went over us this morning about sunrise, and so nearly overhead that its drag rope actually brushed the network of our suspending our car and caused us very serious apprehension. Our captain said that if the material of the bag had been the trumpery varnished silk of 500 or 1,000 years ago, we should inevitably have been damaged. The silk, as he explained it to me, was a fabric composed of the entrails of a species of earthworm. The worm was carefully fed on mulberries, a kind of fruit resembling a watermelon, and when sufficiently fat, was crushed in the middle. The paste thus arising was called papyrus in its primary state and went through a variety of processes until it finally became silk. Similar to regulate, it was once much admired as an article of female dress. Balloons were also very generally constructed from it. A better kind of material, it appears, was subsequently found in the down surrounding the seed vessels of a plant vulgarly called euphorbium. And at that time, botanically termed milkweed. The latter kind of silk was designated as a silk Buckingham on account of its superior durability, and was usually prepared for use for being varnished with a solution of gum. Caoutchouc, a substance which in some respects must have resembled the gutta percha now in common use. This caoutchouc was occasionally called Indian rubber or rubber of twist, and was no doubt one of the numerous fungi. Never tell me again that I am not at heart an antiquarian. Talking of drag ropes, our own, it seems, has at this moment knocked a man overboard from one of the small magnetic propellers that swarmed in the ocean below us. A boat of about 6,000 tons, and from all accounts, shamefully crowded. These diminutive barks should be prohibited from carrying more than a definite number of passengers. The man, of course, was not permitted to get on board again, and was soon out of sight. He and his life preserver, I rejoice, my dear friend, that we live in an age so enlightened that no such thing as an individual is supposed to exist. It is the mass in which the true humanity cares by and by. Talking of humanity, do you know that our immortal Wiggins is not so original in his views of the social condition and so forth as his contemporaries are inclined to suppose? Pundit assures me that the same ideas were put nearly in the same way about 1,000 years ago by an Irish philosopher called Fourier, on account of his keeping a retail shop for cat peltries and other furs. Pundit knows, that there can be no mistake about it. How very wonderfully do we see verified every day the profound observation of the Hindu Aristotle, as quoted by Pundit. Thus must we say that not once or twice or a few times, but with almost infinite repetitions, the same opinions come round in a circle among men. April 2nd. Spoke today the magnetic cutter in charge of the middle section of floating telegraph wires. I learned that this was a species of telegraph. When the species of telegraph was first put into operation by Horse, it was considered quite impossible to convey the wires over sea, but now we are at a loss to comprehend where the difficulty lay. So wags the world. Tempora mutander. Excuse me for quoting from the Etruscan. What would we do without the Atlantic telegraph? Pundit says Atlantic was the ancient adjective. We leave to a few minutes to ask the cutter some questions and learned, among other glorious views, that civil war is raging in Africa. Well, the plague is doing its good work beautifully, both in Europe and Asher. A Yesher? Is it not truly remarkable that before the magnificent light shed upon philosophy by the humanity, the world was accustomed to regard war and pestilence as calamities? Do you know that prayers were actually offered up in the ancient temples to the end that these evils might not be visited upon mankind? Is it not really difficult to comprehend upon what principle of interest our forefathers acted? Were they so blind as not to perceive that the destruction of the myriad of individuals it's only so much positive advantage to the mass? April 3rd. It is really a fine, very fine amusement to ascend the rope ladder leading to the summit of the balloon bag, and thus survey the surrounding world. From the car below, you can see, the prospect is not so comprehensive. You can see a little vertically, but seated here where I write this, in the luxuriously cushioned open piazza of the summit, one can see everything that is going on in all directions. Just now, there is quite a crowd of balloons in sight, and they present a very animated appearance. Well, the air is resonant with the hum of so many millions of human voices. I have heard it asserted that when yellow, or pundit will have it, violet, is supposed to have been the first aeronaut, maintained that practicability of traversing the atmosphere in all directions by mere ascending or descending until a favorable current was attained. He was scarcely hearkened to all by his contemporaries, who looked upon him as merely an ingenious sort of madman, because the philosophers of the day declared the thing impossible. Really, now it does seem to me quite unaccountable how anything so obviously feasible could have escaped the sagacity of the ancient savants. But in all ages, the great obstacle to advancement in art have been opposed by the so-called men of science. To be sure, our men of science are not quite so bigoted as those of old. Oh, I have something so queer to tell you on this topic. Do you know that it is not more than 1,000 years ago since the metaphysicians consented to relieve the people of the singular fancy that there existed but two possible roads for the attainment of truth? Believe it if you can. It appears that long, long ago, in the night of time, there lived a Turkish philosopher, or Hindu possibly, called Aries Tauta. This person introduced, or at all events propagated, what was termed the deductive, or a priori, mode of investigation. He started what was termed with what he maintained to be axioms or self-evident truths, and thence proceeded logically, quote unquote, to results. His greatest disciples were one Euclid and one Kant. Well, Aristotle flourished supreme until advent of one hog, surnamed the Ettrick Shepherd, who preached an entirely different system, which he called the a posteriori, or inductive. His plan referred altogether to sensation. He proceeded by observing, analyzing, and classifying facts. Instantiae naturae, as they were effectively called into general laws. Aristotle's mode, in a word, was based on noumena. Hogs on phenomena. Well, so great was the admiration excited by this latter system that at its first introduction, Aristotle fell into disrepute, but finally he recovered ground and was permitted to divide the realm of truth with his more modern rival. The savants now divide the realm of truth with his more modern rival. The savants now maintained that the Aristotelian and Baconian roads were the sole possible avenues to knowledge. Quote unquote Baconian, you must know, was an adjective invented as equivalent to Hoggian and more euphonious and dignified. Now, my dear friend, I do assure you most positively that I represent this matter fairly on the soundest authority, and you can easily understand how a notion so absurd on its very face must have operated to retard the progress of all true knowledge, which makes its advantages most almost invariably by intuitive bounds. The great idea confined investigations to crawling, and for hundreds of years so great was the infatuation about hog especially, that at virtue end was put to all thinking, properly so called. No man dare utter the truth to which he felt himself indebted to his soul alone. It mattered not whether the truth was even demonstrably a truth, for the bullet-headed savants of the time regarded only the road by which he had attained it. They would not even look at the road, the end. Let us see the means, they cried. The means! If upon investigation of the means it was found to come under neither the category Aries, that is to say ram, nor under the category hog, why then the savants went no further, but pronounced the quote-unquote theorist a fool, and would have nothing to do with him or his truth. Now, it cannot be maintained, even by the crawling system, the greatest amount of truth would be attained in any long series of ages, for the repression of imagination was an evil not to be compensated for by any superior certainty in the ancient modes of investigation. The error of these germains, J-U-R mains, these Wronch, these English, and these Americans. The latter, by the way, were our own immediate progenitors. Was an error quite analogous with that of the wiseacre, whose fancies that he must necessarily see an object, the more closely he's supposed to hold it to his eyes. These people blinded by themselves by details. When they proceeded hoggishly, their quote-unquote facts were not by no means always facts. A matter of little consequence had it not been for assuming that they were facts, and must be facts because they appeared to be such. When they proceeded on the path of the ram, their course was scarcely as straight as a ram's horn, for they never had an axiom which was an axiom at all. They must have been very blind not to see this even in their own day, for even in their own day, many of the long quote-unquote established axioms had been rejected. For example, ex nihilo fit. A body cannot act where it is not. There cannot exist antipodes. Darkness cannot come out of light. All of these, and a dozen other similar propositions, formally admitted without hesitation as axioms, or even at the period of which I speak, seem to be untenable. How absurd in these people, then, to persist in putting faith in quote-unquote axioms as immutable bases of truth. But even out of the mouths of their soundest reasoners, it is easy to demonstrate the futility, the impalpability of their axioms in general. What was the soundest of their logicians? Let me see. We'll go and ask Planet and be back in a minute. Here we have it. Here is a book written nearly 1,000 years ago, and lately translated from the English, which, by the way, appears to have been the rudiment of the American. Pundit says it is decidedly the cleverest ancient work on its topic. Logic. The author, who was much thought of in his day, was one Miller or Mill, and we find it a record of him as a point of some importance that he had a mill horse, called Bentham. But let us glance at the treatise. Ability or inability to conceive, says Mill, very properly, is in no case to be received as a criterion of axiomatic truth. What modern, in his senses, would ever think of disputing this truism? The only wonder with us must be how it happened that Mr. Mill conceived it necessarily even to hint at anything so obvious. So far, so good. But let us turn over another paper. What have we here? Contradictories cannot both be true. That is, cannot coexist in nature. Here, Mr. Mill means, for example, that a tree must either be a tree or not a tree. That it cannot be at the same time a tree and not a tree. Very well, but I ask him why. His reply is this, and never pretends to be anything else but this. Because it is impossible to conceive that contradictories can both be true. But this is no answer at all, by his own showing. For has he not just admitted that as a truism that, quote, ability or inability to conceive is in no case to be received as a criterion of axiomatic truth? Now, I do not complain of these ancients so much as because their logic is, by their own showing, utterly baseless, worthless, and fantastic altogether, as because of their pompous and imbecile prescription of all other roads of truth, of all other means for its attainment, that the two preposterous paths, one of creeping and one of crawling, to which they have dared to confine the soul that loves nothing so well as to soar. By the by, my dear friend, do you not think it would puzzle these ancient dogmaticians to have determined by which of their two roads it was the most important and most sublime of all the truths was, in effect, attained? I mean the truth of gravitation. Newton owed it to Kepler. Kepler admitted that his three laws were guessed at. These three laws, of all laws, which led to the great English mathematician, to his principle, the basis of all physical principle, to go behind which we must enter the kingdom of metaphysics. Kepler guessed, that is to say, imagined. He was essentially a theorist. That word's now of so much sanctity, formerly an epithet or of contempt. Would it not have puzzled these old moles too, to have explained by which of their two quote-unquote roads a cryptographist on riddles a cryptograph of more than usual secrecy, or by which the two roads Champollion directed mankind to those enduring and almost innumerable truths which resulted from his deciphering to the hieroglyphs. One more word on this topic and I will be done boring you. Is it not passing strange that with their eternal prattling about roads to truth, these bigoted people missed what we now so clearly conceive to be the great highway, that of consistency? Does it not altogether seem singular how they should have failed to deduce from the words of God the vital fact that a perfect consistency must be an absolute truth? How plain has our own progress since the late announcement of this proposition? Investigation has been taken out of the hands of the ground moles and given as a task to the true and only true thinkers, the men of ardent imagination. These latter theorize. Can you not fancy the shout of scorn with which my words will be received by their progenitors, were it possible for them to be now looking over my shoulder? These men, I say, theorize, and their theories are simply corrected, reduced, systematized, cleared little by little of their dross of inconsistency, until finally a perfect consistency stands apparent, which even the most stolid admit, because it is a consistency, to be absolute and unquestionable truth. April 4th. The new gas is doing wonders, in conjunction with the new improvement with gutta percha. How very safe, commodious, imaginable, and in every respect convenient are our modern balloons. Here is an immense one, in every respect. Here's an immense one approaching us at the rate of at least 150 miles an hour. It seems to be crowded with people. Perhaps there are 300 or 400 passengers, and yet it soars to an elevation of nearly a mile, looking down upon us with sovereign contempt. Still, 100 or 200 miles an hour is slow traveling after all. Do you remember our flight on the railroad across the Canada continent? Fully 300 miles an hour. That was traveling. Nothing to be seen, though. Nothing to be done but flirt, feast, and dance in the magnificent saloons. Do you remember what an odd sensation that was experienced when, by chance, we caught a glimpse of external objects? While the cars were in full flight, everything seemed unique in one mass. For my part, I cannot say by that I preferred the traveling by the slow train of 100 miles an hour. Here we were permitted to have glass windows, even to have them open, and something like a distinct view of the country was attainable. Pundit says that the route for the Great Canada Railroad must have been, in some measure, marked out about 900 years ago. In fact, he goes so far as to assert that actual traces of a road were still discernible, traces referable to a period quite as remote as that mentioned. The track, it appears, was double only. Ours, you know, has 12 paths. And so 3 or 4 new ones are in preparation. The ancient rails are very slight, and placed so together as to be, according to modern notions, quite frivolous, if not dangerous, in the extreme. The present width of track, 50 feet, is considered indeed scarcely secure enough. For my part, I make no doubt that a track of some sort must have existed in very remote times. As pundit asserts, for nothing can be clearer to my mind than that period. At some period, not less than 7 centuries ago, certainly, the northern and southern Canada continents were united. The Canadians then would have been driven by necessity to a great railroad across the continent.